Hey guys, just a quick couple of notes. School has been taking time away from video making lately, but now the semester is almost over. So I should be putting out much more consistent uploads over the break and into the next semester. Also, the style of this speed paint is going to be different from my typical style because I had an assignment to make a vector movie poster using Photoshop, and I decided to kill two birds with one stone and do Knives Out since I knew I wanted to make a video about it. So I hope you guys enjoy, and let's get into the video. Rian Johnson's fifth feature-length film is a throwback to the classic all-star whodunit brand of film, and when this was initially announced, I was kind of excited. Now, Rian Johnson is a filmmaker that I have an interesting relationship with. The Last Jedi wasn't great, which was his previous writing and directing project, but his first film, Brick, is an amazing film that's extremely underrated, and I highly recommend you see it if you haven't, and I genuinely like Looper. And I know a lot of people who dislike TLJ also dislike Looper. Looper isn't a perfect film, but I don't think it's bad, and even if it is, I still just enjoy it. And I haven't seen his film The Brothers Bloom, so I can't comment on that one. So basically, Rian Johnson was batting 2 out of 3 for me from his previous films, and the concept of a whodunit instantly reminded me of Brick, so I went into this with tentative excitement. I had no idea if this was going to be a return to form for him, or if, as he has stated and defended in several interviews and Twitter comments, was going to double down on this The Last Jedi brand of filmmaking. And I'm happy to say that my excitement was well rewarded because I think Knives Out delivers really well on a lot of ways. Definitely some issues that are worth noting, especially one big one in particular, but I'll save that more for spoiler talk since it's hard to discuss without giving anything away. This movie is really well paced. I can't say that I was ever bored, nor did the film ever feel like it drug on too much. The performances were all incredibly well done. Ana de Armas, who I know mainly as my holographic waifu from Blade Runner 2049, did a really good job as the lead character Marta, and as a side note, Marta must be protected at all costs. This is not an option. All of the celebrity cast did a great job. Daniel Craig as Detective Blanc was great. The film could have benefited from more Blanc, but he was still a very fun character to watch and very charismatic, and apparently Rian has expressed interest in making a Detective Blanc cinematic universe, and I would be 100% on board with that, so long as the films were of quality. It definitely seems like this whodunit detective style of film is Rian's brand that he does really well with, so if that's the direction he wants to continue to go with, I'd have no complaints about it. This movie has a lot of genuine laughs, a lot of really good, clever humor and running jokes that I never found to get old or overused, and it was always appropriately timed. It never ruined the tone or fizzled out tension unnecessarily, which for this movie was really important because it relied on that being a murder mystery. But it did a really good job with that, genuinely funny without overdoing it. And then on a couple of more negative notes, some of the side characters didn't really feel like they had a reason to be there, and I know that some of that was just to flesh out family dynamics, and I wasn't expecting full-blown backstories for every family member, but even characters like that second police character who was essentially just a Harlan Thrombey fanboy really didn't do anything and yet still continued to pop out throughout. And on a last non-spoiler note, the politics mentioned in the film are a tad on the preachy side at times and doesn't flush well with the rest of the film. I know people are going to blow this aspect of the film way out of proportion and claim it to be SJW trash, but that's seriously overselling what the movie is actually doing. Some of the politics talk actually is pretty realistic family banter that you'd expect at most modern family gatherings, and of course the main character is in a tough situation related to one of the topics they talk about, and she's obviously very sympathetic, so we see things more from her perspective than others, and there is nothing inherently wrong with that. And the film even has what I found to be interesting exploration about how people are willing to flop on their own convictions when their personal livelihood is threatened, which fit very well within the theme of the film. So it's a small complaint, but still bothered me a little bit, so I'll mention it. And now I'm going to officially issue the spoiler warning for here on out. I was initially very turned off by essentially learning exactly what happened to Harlan fairly early in the film. I thought this was going to be a blunder of subverting expectations with no satisfaction in its payoff, but the fact that the film then shifts focus and goes away from the typical whodunit style of being from the detective's perspective trying to solve the case, it instead becomes about Marta trying to live with this cover-up, and I thought that was a great idea. And even then, you knew that what happened couldn't be the full story because there were still details mentioned during the interviews that didn't add up to Marta's story, particularly the mention of Meg having heard the dogs barking when we knew the dogs didn't bark at Marta, and the fact that the medication was supposed to be in Marta's bag but was missing. So there was this dual sense of insight and intrigue that kept me invested as the film became less of a whodunit and more of a howdunit. And this almost almost works really well, but I'm going to sideline this discussion for just a minute and come back to it. There are a lot of very satisfying payoffs, even things that I wasn't expecting to be resolved or get a conclusion did. My favorite was definitely the first and last shot with Harlan's mug. Marta standing on that balcony staring down at the family was the power move of the century. There's the mention of how Harlan would play his little games with his older daughter that pays off with her discovering the cheating by revealing the hidden message in the fire. There was Harlan mentioning that fools don't even know a fake knife from a real one. That comes back to bite Ransom in the ass in the last few minutes of the movie. It was all very nice to watch all of these seemingly random loose threads and off comments tie up really nicely. As far as the conclusion and the final reveal of what ultimately happened, I mostly liked it, but have a few mixed feelings on some things. I feel like I'm forgetting something, but I can't seem to remember or figure out exactly why Fran would have thought that Ransom did anything after she got her hands on the toxicology report showing Harlan's normal dosage of medication. I mean, her seeing him at the house during the funeral messing with the medical bag would certainly be suspect enough for her to think something was up, and she had that whole idea about the slow poisoning thing, but if that's what was happening, shouldn't something have popped up in the tox report? Maybe Ransom showing up at the abandoned store confirmed her suspicions to her. I'm not totally sure what happened there. Also, on the topic of Fran, a lot of people have taken issue with the whole "Hugh did this" line because, yeah, it's kind of cheesy. It's really cheesy. But my issue with it is less what she said and more how she said it. Because the film set up that Ransom had the help call him Hugh, so if she was trying to tell Marta what happened, that could be something she said. But she said it so angrily towards Marta and looked like she was staring daggers into her soul. It seemed odd. I would have more expected it to sound like a desperate plea as she was dying more than anything else, not a scathing accusation. I think that would have actually been much better, because then you would have this person dying sounding like they're saying you and seemingly showing disappointment and desperation towards the person when she's actually just trying to get her point across however she can. Just about everything else about the reveal worked really well and had lots of details sprinkled throughout the film that built up very nicely to this conclusion. I like how the attempted killer had to go through these very typical murder mystery actions of burning the evidence down, killing the maid, etc., not to cover his own ass, but to destroy proof of someone else's innocence so that he could get his inheritance money. I was also genuinely tense at the end when Ransom tried to murder Marta, and I thought he had for a second, but like I said, we had that really nice setup earlier from Harlan in the film. So luckily Marta is still around. But now I want to go back to what I mentioned earlier about this movie almost working, because I have to mention that it really doesn't make sense why Detective Blanc wouldn't ask Marta, a character unable to lie, outright if she had anything to do with Harlan's death, especially after he admitted himself that he suspected her from the beginning because of the drop of blood on her shoe. Yes, he did question her, but the questions and her answers were intentionally very vague. I could see the argument that he knew she didn't have ill intent and even then found elements of the scenario suspicious outside the suspected murder and wanted to continue the investigation, but wouldn't it be good detective work to ask the girl who physically can't lie if she knew how Harlan died? Even if he knew, he still would have reasons to be suspect that other things were awry because of things like the toxicology reports and the fact that the dogs barked at someone that wasn't her. This is where I feel that Rian tried a bit too hard to do something different. This isn't near as bad or to the extent that we saw in The Last Jedi, but man, he was so close on this one to making it work really well, and I will happily admit that despite this error in logic, I greatly enjoyed what we were given, but it's such a big and obvious hole, I can't ignore it. It would have made more sense to see Blanc essentially helping Marta throughout the film as someone who appeared to be a murderer find out what happened, but that would have been more like the classic whodunit, and I don't think that's what Rian wanted to go for. The concept of a character heavily caught up in a murder mystery who can't lie, and the concept of a howdunit are both really good ideas that just have this one really unfortunate point of clashing with each other that never really gets addressed by the script. So it's unfortunate unfortunate that so much care obviously went into the details of the script to just have this big, obvious thorn stuck to the side of it. Overall, I would still recommend this. I know for a lot of people, including myself, this overlook didn't take away too much from the film, but I completely understand why it will for others. I'm curious how thinking about this will change my perspective on the film after a second viewing, but right now I still think this movie has a lot of positives to offer. It brought some really new ideas to the table, especially for the genre, and still gave some very satisfying conclusions to the story. I think that's all I have to say about the film, but as always, I want to know what you guys thought. Were you bothered by this huge plot hole, or are you kind of like me where you're willing to forgive it more just because you thought everything else was done well? Or do you have a completely different reason for not liking this movie? You know, be sure to let me know down below, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.